Hi everyone, my name is Nairobi and I'm the host of Power to the Flower podcast. So by now you probably know what our theme is here. We analyze and look at the historical context of policies and their effects on communities of color. Today is no different. We're really looking at present day policies and how somewhat of an election or anything can change the course of what a cannabis entrepreneur can accomplish in their city or town. Well, we just recently came off of a local election. There were some wins and some losses, just as there is in every election, but local elections matter. And the reason why we start off with elections is because if you elect an elected official or you vote for somebody, they may or may not win a seat into office, but their decisions while they're on the council or in the mayoral seat, which is the local positions, right? Or a town board or even a licensing board, which many municipalities have to appoint people to, you will have to confront them if you are an entrepreneur at some point in your journey of being established as a cannabis company. A local election can determine two things, a friend or a foe. And the reason why I even mention that is because you may be able to find an ally in somebody who's serving on the council, or maybe even someone who's serving in the mayoral seat. A lot of their views and perspectives matter to your business because whether they're in favor of cannabis or not, in a legal state, they do still have to confront the reality of taxation and approval of what their municipality desires to have in their city or town. The impact of having an elected official in your corner cannot be understated, especially if you are an entrepreneur of color. We experience barriers, and by we, I mean people like me, who are trying to enter or break into a space, but find that there are many obstacles that are in their way. Sometimes, even especially on the local level, because of misunderstandings of what the state policy really is supposed to mean for a municipality. We've seen conflicts on the local level in New York. We've seen conflicts in the local level in Massachusetts. We've seen it all around. It doesn't just pertain to the East Coast. We've even seen it in the Midwest. People really trying to understand what cannabis policy looks like on every level can be confusing if you don't really know where to start. So today we're going to get into some of that. And I specifically want to highlight yes and no towns and the dichotomy of what that looks like for somebody who's trying to enter into this space. I'm going to start off with using my favorite city in all of the world, Lawrence, Massachusetts. I'm biased because I'm from there. But one thing that I really want to emphasize is Lawrence, just like other towns that have decided to opt out no, is keeping people out of the municipal process to becoming an entrepreneur. That means that even though I'm from Lawrence, I can't actually have my cannabis business there. Can you guess why? Well, I'll give you some time to think about it, but I'll tell you anyway. The reason being is because Lawrence is a town that decided to be a no town. That means that they have what is called a pot ban, or specifically bans in their towns that do not allow for cannabis consumption, along with cannabis sales or cannabis licensure access to anyone. This isn't just specific to entrepreneurs of color, but it definitely affects us the most if you are trying to do business from that town, if you're from there. Well, there's a way that you could get around that though. If you are an entrepreneur in a city or town like Lawrence, and you are interested in changing the landscape of what it means to be a legal city, then you can do so by reaching out to your city councilors. It doesn't just have to be one, it doesn't just have to be a specific or major speaker or somebody who holds a specific position, but reach out to your elected officials and talk to them about the complexities that you face and see if there's a way that you can make some change. Just recently, we came off of a local election, and I'm super excited to say that that means in certain cities and towns where, you may have had a long-standing mayor, or you may have had a long-standing city council that just didn't seem to be on the same line of progress on cannabis, right, as you are as the activist. This is good news because now when you change the face of a council, you're also changing the face of opportunity. That means that where you were confronted with roadblocks before, you may be able to change the landscape by educating the new council and particularly giving some advice to some of those people who may not understand what it's like for a cannabis entrepreneur such as yourself. So this is why it's important to vote. And that's the importance of cannabis and elections, because you really can have an impact on who's there in office and whether or not they're your ally, right? Your friend or your foe. You want to find someone who can really support you along the way and understands the barriers, because when your application process goes through, you're going to need local approval. And the reason why you'll need this local approval is because there are things called HCAs, or host community agreements. Host community agreements are basically the outline or a document that says, me as a cannabis entrepreneur or a cannabis business, I adhere to coming into agreement with the community that is allowing me to be there by stating what my positive impact will be, outlining any potential threats to the community, such as public safety, right? By having that business and agreeing to the terms and conditions of which the city and you can come to terms to. So it's very crucial to have people who understand cannabis and what those impacts are on these councils, on these, in the mayoral seats, and aren't really necessarily opposed to the business, but still, just like you, commonly care about public safety. So there is practicality in having an HCA, right? But now with different types of lawsuits and different types of barriers of entry for certain people while signing these HCAs, and frankly, let's call it like it is, some sort of predatory practices were happening before, where some municipalities weren't really highlighting or outlining how they were using the money or percentage of taxation to positively impact the community from the taxation of that business. So because of that, lawsuits that came about also changed policy on the regulatory front. So in a place like Massachusetts, you're also able to, and you should now, right? Because there were some policy changes that happened this year. You are now able to go ahead and send in a copy of your HCA to your application through your application in the CCC, so that they may review it, because now there is that same regulatory arm that reviews your application is also looking at how that host community is working with you, because not only are regulators supposed to regulate the whole industry and the cannabis businesses as a whole, they're also supposed to regulate on cannabis policy and how it's enacted through the whole state. So this means localities as well. With the changes in HCA, now we have an opportunity for entrepreneurs to have an ally even within the regulators, so that there's an equal balance and, more specifically, fair play. That means that anybody can go in and outline their concerns and confront this to the CCC if they have those concerns as well. Obviously, I would say go to your legal team and get the best form of advice, but this is one of the best changes that could happen, because it allows for people now in other states to see what the barriers could be for local municipalities and entrepreneurs working together. HCAs have been controversial for so many different reasons, but the main reason being is because they have previously been a barrier. And like I mentioned before with lawsuits, it's not always the best thing, because there's room for exploitation where there's not an equal balance. But in the best case scenario, on behalf of the local municipality, the people who are the residents there don't recognize the financial commitments, because most people aren't educated on what the responsibility of the cannabis company is to the municipality. But if they knew, they would know that these cannabis companies not only have to make these commitments in a positive impact plan to their CCC application in general, but they also have to talk to the host community and figure out ways that their business may impact even traffic congestion, or if there's some sort of overflow in their business, how they're going to address that, or any sort of negative impacts. So in DC, we have Initiative 71. Initiative 71 was what made DC technically legal, at least in the municipality there in the District of Columbia. The problem with DC, and I think this is something that everybody needs to know and understand, we know that DC is the capital of the country, but we know that it also doesn't have, it's not a state, so it's just a city. If you've ever been to DC for an 8th grade trip, then you would know that one of the biggest things about that is that DC is the District of Columbia. It's one city, but you could still visit all of the federal monuments, all of the things that pertain to our nation in terms of our symbols, our courts, Congress is there, the White House is there. These very important federal institutions are there in DC, but then there's no state representation. And so now you have DC in an unequal footing to, let's say, Lawrence, right? Lawrence being a municipality, it also is from the state of Massachusetts, even though it shares just with DC and every other city in this country, it shares the federal government as the highest form of government. So DC is disproportionately disadvantaged, and we need to understand that when it comes to any type of policy for DC, anything that has been tried to be changed for the positive, you're still going to run through those different barriers because there's no representation. So on top of not having representation in the state, you're also not having representation in the federal government. So these are the barriers for cities like DC, and we're talking about, an area that is highly represented by Black people, right? Black people live there. We have DC being the home of one of our very favorite HBCUs, Howard University. We know that it's a very historical place, even for Black people that built this country, right? Like, let's be real. So when we're talking about what is owed and what is deserved of these people who are descendants of long generations of DC residents and inhabitants, it doesn't matter. Listen, the Black community, period, deserves reparations when it comes to this. And that means entrepreneurs, when we're thinking about who gets access to resources. And DC being left out, having this initiative that basically, Initiative 71, made DC's weed a sort of a gifting system. So instead of what we would normally have, a market like Massachusetts, right, they created a policy that is a gifting system where instead of purchasing cannabis directly outright, I would have to then get gifted cannabis. But I could purchase, let's say, a t-shirt. So I could go to Legacy DC, one of my favorite dispensaries, right? Purchase a t-shirt and get gifted cannabis. But I'm purchasing the t-shirt, not the cannabis. I'm getting gifted it. But it makes it so complex because there's also these taxing laws and these tax codes, more specifically 280E, which I talked about in the last episode. 280E basically limits you on only being able to be getting tax deductions on the cost of goods. So if you're a cultivator, right, you also of cost of goods sold, I'm sorry. So if you're selling direct to consumer, right, plan what have you, some overhead expenses may not be taxable because those are the things that are not directly goods being sold. So even the things that you purchase to make your product, like a machine or even the electricity bill, like those things are not taxable. So imagine on top of that, you do have to pay a tax to your municipality, to your state, and to the federal government. But now on top of that, these taxes are unlike any other industry. But when you're thinking about places like DC, they're dually taxed, and in the worst way because there's no offset. So unlike DC, Massachusetts recently changed its 280E laws. So now we're taxed differently. You're able to, have a little bit more tax relief if you're a cannabis company. For cannabis entrepreneurs, this is a great thing, because now you're able to get back a little bit more money for your expenses in your business in the state of Massachusetts. DC does not have that, right? New York is also a state that decouples. So other areas I think that we need to figure out in the industry, right? So aside from just decoupling on the state level, we as social equity advocates should be advocating for complete tax relief if you're a social equity applicant. I mean, it makes sense on the federal level. If we're getting this push for, or we're trying to push for that on the state level, think about what that could do on the federal level. But on the local level, I think that that's, if you're paying some sort of tax, which we already do, right? Some of them it's 3%, some of them it's more than that, depending on where you live. And I think that what has to happen is a collective conversation about where are these funds going towards, and how much can we involve stakeholders in the process to make sure that the funds are being appropriately allocated within the municipality. Because one thing that I've learned and know for sure is that even when it comes to cannabis, education is the number one thing that will break stigma in our communities. The people that do the work to educate people are our local organizers, our nonprofits, people like, that have been most vocal through by way of their own personal experience. So it could be even entrepreneurs. The folks that are actually doing the work on the ground, though, the organizers, the people who've been through that in their personal experience of being ostracized or disproportionately impacted for smoking marijuana, that is something that we have to greatly examine. How are we going to sustain the advocates in this industry, right? How are we going to sustain the people who are doing the work to educate and empower the overall community understanding about what this plant benefit could do? So I think that if we continue to look at ways that taxation could actually go back into the community that's trying to make the change, I think that it'll be a much more fruitful conversation and justification as to why these cannabis companies should be paying and who should be paying more than others. Frankly, because it's not a level playing field. And until we get that level playing field, which we're trying to advocate for in every aspect, we have to continue to look at what are some of the innovative ways that we can change things for the better. So Massachusetts, we gave that example about Lawrence, and in DC, we gave that example about the statehood issue and how that, DC not being a state is a barrier to a lot of the entrepreneurs breaking into the space, and even the gifting mechanism, because of the illegalities on the federal level, right? They had to be a little bit more creative, even not having a state or a regulatory arm like we have the CCC in Massachusetts or OCM in New York. So, all that being said, let's be innovative in the ways that we think about empowering the community and make the focal point onto education and the uplifting of those who've been harmed and impacted by the war on drugs. In New York, one of my very favorite things that is happening on the ground right now is a lot of the advocates, shout out to Pilar de Jesus, who's one of the, leading advocates on this. I think pretty much everyone in the industry knows her for being vocal, going out and knocking on doors. And I wish that more people would continue to give others their flowers in this industry. That's who I'm giving the flowers to on this podcast. Pilar de Jesus is someone who I think I have seen or just have heard about the work that she's done. And the one thing that I have heard her say is putting community first, empowering the activists that are on the ground that are trying to bring back the purpose of why cannabis should be legal in the first place. I think that folks like her, and there are so many others, Ross McCarthy is someone that I admire, Tashida Johnson, even on the regulatory arm, right? There are people that Shailene Title, who I love and adore, there are people who are always looking at policy and they're figuring out the ways that it actually applies to real life. So when we see those people, we want to give them the tools to be able to bring back that resource into the community. So as entrepreneurs, We want to be able to make an impact. And for me personally, I really care a lot about generational wealth and what that means for me and my family. Aside from our struggle, I know what people like me have gone through and what the policies of before in the past have done to our communities now. In my own personal family, we've had to experience displacement because of drug policies not being allowed in federal housing, right? So, not me in particular, but rather a family member of mine that I love and adore. So, these are things that I care about, and I see how this prohibition of a plant really affects people. Because our communities have been policed for so long, it's really obvious as to why we have stigmas within our own community. It's almost as if we feel like we're doing bad, but now that it's legal, the mental adjustment isn't there. You're being told all your life that something is bad, then you're going to believe all your life for the rest of it that it's bad, even if somebody tells you that it's okay. Right? So now we have to unlearn the things that we have learned as a society, as a culture, about what cannabis actually is for us as a whole, what it can do, what are the benefits, and more importantly, how we need to repair the harms from the past. But not just us, but rather the people who have been doing the harm. And the ones who have been harmed need that reparation. They need that opportunity to be able to do better, to excel from the one thing that is now being a profitable opportunity for others. Okay, so there's a lot of work to be done, but overall there are methods of which we can accomplish that. So in Massachusetts, we talked about Lawrence and their need to have to go to their city council meetings. Pilar de Jesus talks about the need to have the community activated and show up for social equity applicants, right? We also heard in New York that there are people who have genuine concerns about predatory practices, even done by DASNY, right? These state agencies that are providing properties, but these properties are bidding wars for people who may not have the highest resources. So if we're really trying to empower folks, it can't be something that we're doing just in name only, but rather with the policies that we're enacting, the policies we're pushing for. So in order to find out how those policies can be changed, we have to see how it's affecting those that are involved in the market, that are involved from the historical context, that have been in the justice system, or rather the injustice system, right? Because now we see that blatantly there is a market that is profitable for some, but for others are still losing. There are people that are still in jail. The onus is on us to be able to make sure that the people making these policies understand where we're coming from when we say we care about community, we care about making sure there's equal access for every person who wants to enter this industry, that could be anywhere or at all disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. So one of the solutions we already talked about, but I'm just going to recap, is voting, right? Because the people who you vote, you want to make sure that they are in line with what you believe in as best as you can, right? You want to make sure that the people that you're putting into office believe in the same things you do, so that it's no surprise when it comes down to voting something like, overturning a past cannabis city ban, right? That they would be on your side, because you know that they're a good counselor, or you know that you can count on their vote because of how they have made their campaign promises to you based on that, or maybe you've created a relationship with them, or ways to have constructive conversations so that they're building momentum to be able to vote against or vote in favor for a policy that is a measure you want for your town. Obviously, not only is voting important because you get the best type of allies in the process as an entrepreneur or even as a consumer, but also you want to be able to get as much information out to your community so that we're all on the same page of what's a priority to us, right? So aside from voting, that was one recap. We also have a way of being able to empower the community by making sure that people are understanding and are educated on the cannabis benefits that it brings not just to our individual lives, right, but also repairing harms to families that have been done wrong by the system that oppressed them. Another way that we can help is by empowering our advocates and our nonprofits who are doing the work on the ground already to provide resources for these folks, or more importantly, to change the conversation a little bit, right? So I'm thinking about ones that just popped into my head. The Parabola Center we had mentioned before, really great on leading research papers, policy conversations to change it for the landscape of the market for the betterment of social equity applicants and really for the betterment of the market. We also we've seen folks like Mass Eon who are heavily on the ground, and Mass Eon is Massachusetts Equal Opportunities Now, a nonprofit that I've mentioned before, always leads on policy and gives us updates on some of the conversations that are being had in the State House, or even more so with local legislators, right? On the local level, you will more than likely find organizers such as someone like a Pilar de Jesus in New York, or even like an Annette Fernandez in New York, who these are people who have built momentum and have garnered support along the way for the policies and the pushes because that they're pushing out, because it's for the betterment of the community. And then lastly, I would say take action, right? You want to take action. You want to build consensus. You want to go ahead and reach out to your city council and write those letters. Go in to the meeting that is happening every Tuesday. Know who that city councilor is. Have conversations with that city councilor, and have them with all, right? But on top of that, knock on your neighbor's door. Have a conversation with your neighbor and say, look, maybe not your neighbor that you're the most closest to, but maybe somebody on your street that can understand what's happening in the community about, dispensaries not being able to open up. Because that ultimately leads to tax dollars, and where that could go is something that you and I as neighbors can decide, right? But we have to bring these concerns to our decision makers, which are our legislators. And on the local level, we know who those are. And more importantly, if we are looking and hearing about events that are happening that can empower folks, we want to make sure we spread that word. So I know I'm just going to put a plug in for High Exposure NYC that is having an event upcoming soon. December, I actually have the day. I'm just going to plug it in terms of like a picture. You'll be able to see it. And then also we have Mass Eon, who's hosting an event, a fundraiser in December as well. I'm going to post the picture and information for everybody to see. And, we have other nonprofit organizations that are doing work. Obviously, MJ BizCon was able to highlight a lot of the different policy conversations happening with other leaders like Ross McCarthy, right? Like, we want to make sure we're highlighting these champions. So thank you all for the work that you're doing, for the ones who are doing the work. And for those who want to do the work and feel empowered every time you hear about somebody talking about it and you agree with something, just know there are things you actually can do. And you should always know who your local electeds are, because they're the ones that are going to change things for you in the betterment of your life or against the quality of your life. And cannabis is certainly one of those things that we can measure as a quality of life issue. So thanks again for tuning in, and I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, reach out to me. If you'd like to hear about what we're talking about next episode, we will be talking about nonprofits. So that's it for episode. Forward to seeing you on episode 5. Bye.